Hi everyone. So someone asked me to make a video on child protective services. Now, in relation to the exam, I'm not really sure, excuse me, I'm not really sure if there will be anything in particular about child protective services on the exam, but there may be scenarios that ask you what you would do in a certain situation where you would have to call child protective services or make some kind of report to child protective services. So I'll just talk on that for a few minutes. So this won't be a long video because there's nothing that I could think of that would be on the exam pertaining to child protective services in particular. So and this is just based off my experience. This is nothing that's in the book or anything like that. Child protective services, and as we know, lots of people think that social workers take people's children away and that we all work for DSS, the Department of Social Services, or Child Protective Services and all that, which we know is not true. And we know that social work is a broad field and you can do tons and tons of different things. And we should know that we as social workers cannot take anybody's child away from them, that there has to be a court order or law enforcement has to take a child from a home. DSS or Child Protective Services may recommend that the child is taken away from the home based off their observations, but we can't specifically go into a home and take a child physically out of the home back with us without law enforcement present or a court order. Okay. So as far as child protective services, their main goal is supposed to be family preservation. So they don't want to take the child from the home. They only want to, well, their main goal, like I said, is to keep the child with the family. And if it's safe to do so, then they will implement a treatment plan. So let's say, let me think of a scenario just off the top of my head. Say that a random family member, or no, let's say that a neighbor next door to you heard some loud music playing one night, and you were having a party or something like that, and they saw your children outside. Let's say you had a 3-year-old child who didn't have on a shirt, only had on a pamper, no shoes, was playing outside in the yard. People were drinking out. It's a cookout, so let's say people were outside drinking, having a great time listening to music, and they saw your child, no clothes on, no shoes. People were drunk, and that they called and made an anonymous report to the Child Protective Services division of whatever your social services agency is called. And so the next thing you know, a day or two later, someone is coming and knocking on your door, and they're saying that someone made an anonymous report that your child was outside running around, people were drinking, and they've come to investigate. So that's typical of, that's a minor situation that could happen. Something more severe where a report would be made is something like domestic violence. Let's say that, again, you have a neighbor who constantly hears fighting and banging in your house or your apartment, and they know that you have children in there, so they call the police. The police comes. You and your mate, your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whatever, are having a physical altercation for whatever reason, and your child is present. There will be a report made depending on what state you're in, but I'm speaking specifically about South Carolina. A report has been made because your child was present. You or whoever the aggressor was in the conflict will be charged with domestic violence, 2nd degree, in South Carolina. Say that they've never had any other charges of domestic violence. This is the first charge, but because your child is present, the charge is domestic violence, 2nd degree as opposed to 3rd degree. So victim advocate would call, or police would call to the Department of Social Services and make a report, a mandated report, because social workers, police officers, or mandated reporters. They make a report, and someone from the agency comes and checks on you and the child, and they investigate. So the first extreme, like I said, is something minor, and then the second extreme with domestic violence is something a little bit more severe. So again, the point is to keep the child with the family if it's within reason and it's safe for the child to stay with the family. So let's say that the caseworker or social worker went to the first home where the party happened. They investigated and they determined that, hey, it was just a wild party. And it wasn't necessarily even a wild party. Maybe the neighbor's perception was that it was a wild party, but let's say there was a babysitter watching the baby, and the baby got hot, took his clothes off, or whatever the situation may be. But they determined that the house is clean. Child Protective Services, when they do their investigation, they can and they will talk to people who know you, your family and your friends, and they try to investigate and find out what kind of parent you are, what you do with your children on a regular basis, if the family or friends have ever seen you abuse your child. So they do an investigation on this first scenario, and they don't find anything bad. So they may implement a treatment plan. I don't know what would be in a plan for a situation like that. It was just a cookout. They may not even implement a plan. They may just determine that it's unfounded and nothing bad happened, and they just close that case out, or not even open the case. So that's that, and the child stays with the family. Okay, that's that. Now, for the domestic violence situation, let's say that they did an investigation. Let's say that the mom was actually the primary aggressor, which typically isn't the case, but just because I like to do things differently, we'll say that the mom is the aggressor in the fight that happened, and the dad was the victim. So let's say that the mom was the aggressor. She started the fight, and they speak with the victim, who's the dad. They find out that the mom is always being violent, even though a report has never been made on the mom, and this is the first time that they are receiving an incident report or a report of domestic violence in this particular home. Let's say they speak with the dad, and he's like, yeah, she always does this to me. She's always fighting me. She's always throwing things and breaking things, and I just never call on her because I'm a man, and I just don't want to seem weak, and I don't want her to get in trouble because both of us work and we need to support our kids and all that kind of thing. So fortunately, the neighbor called, and because the neighbor called, now we can investigate and find out the severity of the situation where the violence is common and frequent in the household. So now let's say that this child may have experienced some kind of trauma from seeing the violence in the home so often. And we'll even say, just because this is a made up scenario off the top of my head, that the child has been physically impacted because the victim, who's the dad, has disclosed that in several of their fights, the mom will take things and throw things, and the baby has been hit several times by items that the mom throws. So this is a case where, yes, they want to preserve the family, but it's not safe to do so because the child has been not only emotionally and mentally affected, but also physically affected because of being hit by things that were thrown by the mom. Okay, so at this point, family preservation is not the priority here. Now the priority is to make sure that the child is safe. So they still want to keep the child within his or her family as opposed to being in the system. So then they look at kinship. They want to keep the child with someone who is in their immediate family, whether it's a grandma, granddad, older sister, brother that's an adult, aunt, uncle, cousin, and then they'll go and investigate that home as well and make sure, and that person and their background, and make sure they're not sexual predator, make sure they have a clean, stable environment, food, clothing, shelter, all the basic needs for the child. They can get them to and from school if they're of age, that kind of thing. So the caseworker or social worker will then work with the family to implement a treatment plan. And a lot of times in these cases of domestic violence, the victim is also subject to treatment plans, even though they are the victim, because they have to do things in order to get their child back. So the treatment plan may consist of both the victim and the aggressor attending domestic violence classes, parenting classes, getting a job, getting a stable environment for their child, and just providing stability. So these are key points in child protective services: investigations, stability, family preservation, kinship. All those are terms that you will see when talking about child protective services on a scenario question on the exam. What else? I think that's pretty much it. So, once the treatment plan is completed, then the family may be reunited, and then the caseworker or social worker will check in on the child every so often until they feel like the child is back in a stable environment. So that's my take on it from just my experience with what I know about child protective services. I've never worked with them directly, but I've made reports. I've been a case manager for people with treatment plans, and I've seen people drop their children off to social services because they weren't mentally able to care for them. I've seen the treatment plan implemented, and I've seen the family restored. So that's my experience with Child Protective Services and Department of Social Services. So other people might have different experiences and may can give you more on it, but if you have any questions that I can answer, let me know. Comment in the description box, in the comment section. Like and subscribe. Please share the channel with your friends. Let me know if you have any questions. Tutoring is available for $35 an hour. Go to my website, daytodaysocialwork.wix.com/my-site. Browse around for study tips, tutoring consultations, which are free, and just the rates and hours and things like that for tutoring, and also links to more videos and things like that. So until next time, I'll see you all later.